My mom told people that I was staying with relatives. That was the official story. The one she told the neighbors, my teachers, anyone who asked where I'd gone. But it was a lie. My name is Mia Carter. I'm 34 years old. They sent me to an orphanage. I was 12 years old. They drove me there, left me, and never came back for me. For years, I couldn't even say the word out loud. Orphanage. It felt like a dirty secret, something that was my fault. Even now, at 34, saying it feels like I'm breaking a rule. I haven't spoken to my parents in almost 10 years. Not a phone call, not a Christmas card, nothing. People sometimes ask if I miss them, and I don't know how to answer that. How do you miss people who threw you away? But I've never told anyone the full story, the real story of what happened, and why they did it. I think it's time I did. Before it all happened, life was tense. That's the best word for it. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, your car, and what time you take your trash out. My mom, Linda, was obsessed with that, with what people thought. Our house had to be perfect from the outside. The lawn was always mowed, the curtains were always clean, but inside, it was a different world. It was either loud or it was silent. There was no in-between. The loud times were my mom and dad, Greg, shouting. The silent times were worse. It was a heavy, waiting kind of quiet where you were afraid to breathe too loud. I learned to be invisible. I'd go to my room, close the door, and read. I learned how to make myself small and quiet. I learned not to ask for things. My mom's mood dictated everything. If she was happy, the house was okay. If she was upset, everyone had to walk on eggshells. Her anger was like a switch. It could flip for anything. A glass of spilled milk, a toy left on the floor, a bad grade on my report card. My dad, he was just there. He was a passive man. He worked at the local plant, came home, sat in his armchair, and watched TV. He never stood up to my mom. He never protected me from her moods. It was just easier for him to let her run the show. I remember once, I was probably about 10. I had a part in a school play. It was just a small part, 2 or 3 lines. I was so proud. I practiced my lines in my room over and over. The night of the play, my mom said she had a headache. She wasn't going. I looked at my dad and he just shrugged. He said, "You heard your mother." So I didn't go either. I told my teacher the next day that I was sick. It was easier to lie than to explain that my parents just didn't care enough to come. That was my childhood, learning to handle my own disappointment, learning not to expect anything from them. I was the adult in the room, even when I was a kid. I made my own lunches, I got myself up for school, I did my own laundry as soon as I was tall enough to reach the buttons on the machine. I was self-sufficient because I had to be. My mom had a sister, my Aunt Joanne. She was around a lot. She was my mom's biggest supporter. If my mom complained about me, Joanne would nod and agree. "Kids are so difficult," she'd say. She never once took my side. She saw how things were, but she always pretended not to. The house was full of secrets. My dad drank more than he should have, but we never talked about it. We just pretended the empty bottles in the recycling bin were from, I don't know, someone else. My mom would sometimes just get in the car and drive away for hours after a fight, but when she came back, we all pretended she'd just been out running errands. I knew things weren't right. Kids know. You feel it. You feel the tension in your stomach. You feel the fear. But I thought it was normal. I thought all families were like this behind their own clean curtains. I had this one teacher in 6th grade, Mrs. Davison. She was kind. She had a nice smile, and she would ask me how I was doing. Really ask, like she actually wanted to know the answer. One day, she kept me after class for a minute. She said she'd noticed I seemed sad sometimes. She asked if everything was okay at home. I don't know why, but I told her the truth. Not all of it, but a little piece of it. I told her that my parents fought a lot. I said it was really loud and it scared me sometimes. I remember the look on her face. It was concerned. She said, "Mia, you can always talk to me." I felt a huge sense of relief just saying that one small thing out loud. It was like letting a little bit of poison out, but I had no idea what I had just done. I had no idea that this one conversation, this one moment of honesty, was about to destroy my entire life. A few weeks went by and things at home got worse. The shouting was more frequent. My mom was more on edge than ever. She started looking at me with this coldness, like I was a problem, a thing she had to deal with. One afternoon, a car I didn't recognize parked in front of our house. A woman in a dark blue suit got out and walked up to our door. My mom saw her through the window and her face went white. She opened the door just a crack and spoke to the woman on the porch. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but my mom's voice was tight and angry. After the woman left, my mom slammed the door shut and turned to me. Her eyes were blazing. "What did you say?" she hissed. "What did you tell them at school?" I was terrified. I didn't know what she was talking about. "Nothing," I whispered. "Don't you lie to me," she screamed. That was a woman from Child Protective Services. They said they received a report from your school. My blood ran cold. Mrs. Davison, she must have told someone. My mom grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "You have shamed this family. You have brought strangers to our door. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I started to cry. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. "I didn't mean to." "Sorry doesn't fix it," she spat. She let go of my arm and started pacing the living room, her hands twisting together. "Everyone will know. Everyone will talk. This is a nightmare." My dad just sat in his chair, watching the whole thing. He didn't say a word. He just looked from me to my mom, his face blank. That night was the beginning of the end. The house became a prison. The silence was constant. My mom barely spoke to me. When she did, it was to tell me to clean something or to stay in my room. She looked at me like I was a stranger, an enemy who had invaded her home. The shame she talked about, it wasn't about the fighting or the drinking. It was about someone finding out. That was the only crime in her eyes, getting caught. And I was the one who had gotten them caught. About a week later, my mom came into my room. Her voice was strangely calm. It was a fake calm that was scarier than her yelling. "Mia," she said, "we need a break. Things have been very stressful around here." I just nodded, looking down at my hands. "Your father and I think it would be a good idea for you to go stay with some relatives for a little while, just until things calm down." Relatives? I didn't have any relatives we were close to. My mom's family lived in another state. My dad's parents were dead. "Who?" I asked, my voice small. "You don't need to worry about that," she said, her tone sharp. "Just pack a bag, a small one, just a few things for a short stay." A feeling of dread washed over me. This felt wrong. It felt cold and final. "When am I going?" "Tonight," she said. "Your father and I will drive you." I didn't ask any more questions. I knew it was useless. I just did what I was told. I pulled a small duffel bag from my closet and started putting a few t-shirts and a pair of jeans inside. I packed my favorite book. I packed the small stuffed bear I'd had since I was a baby. I felt numb. I was just moving, doing the things she said. My mind was empty. Later that evening, my dad came to my door. "It's time to go," he said. I followed him out to the car. My mom was already in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. I got in the back. No one said anything. We drove for a long time. We left our small town behind and got on the highway, heading toward the city. The streetlights flashed by. I watched the signs, but I didn't recognize any of the names of the towns. I kept waiting for one of them to say something, to explain where we were going, to tell me it was going to be okay. But there was only silence. After about an hour, we pulled off the highway and drove into a part of the city I'd never seen before. The buildings were older, grimmer. We turned down a street lined with tall brick buildings with barred windows. My dad pulled the car over in front of one of them. It was a large, imposing building. It looked like an old school or a hospital. There was a small sign by the door, but it was too dark to read. "We're here," my mom said, her voice flat. She got out of the car. My dad turned off the engine and just sat there for a moment. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared out the windshield. "Dad," I said, "where are we?" He finally turned and looked at me. His eyes were empty. "Your mother will explain," he said. "Just do what she says. It's easier." It's easier. I'll never forget those words. It was easier for him. That's all that mattered. My mom opened my door. "Get out, Mia. Bring your bag." I got out of the car and followed her up the steps to the front door. It was a heavy wooden door with a small square window. She pressed a buzzer on the wall. After a moment, there was a loud click and the door unlocked. My mom pushed it open and led me inside. We were in a small, sterile-looking waiting room. There were a few plastic chairs, a coffee table with some old magazines, and a reception desk behind a thick pane of glass. The air smelled like disinfectant. A woman with tired eyes and a clipboard slid open a small window in the glass. "Can I help you?" she asked. My mom walked up to the desk. "We're here to drop off our daughter," she said, as if she were dropping off a package. "Mia Carter." The woman looked down at her clipboard. "Ah, yes, we've been expecting you. I just need you to sign these forms." She pushed a stack of papers through the slot. My mom took them and started signing them without even reading them. My dad had come in and was standing by the door, his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. I was just standing in the middle of the room, holding my duffel bag. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I still didn't understand. "Mom," I said, "what is this place?" She didn't look at me. She just kept signing the papers. "It's a place for you to stay for a little while, Mia. We talked about this. It's temporary." The woman behind the glass looked at me with a flicker of something, pity, maybe. Then she looked away. My mom finished signing the papers and pushed them back through the slot. The woman checked them over. "Okay," the woman said. "That's everything." She looked at me. "Someone will be out to get you in a minute." My mom turned to me. She didn't hug me. She didn't even touch me. She just looked at me with those cold, distant eyes. "Be good, Mia," she said. "Don't cause any trouble." Then she turned and walked toward the door. My dad was already holding it open. He glanced at me one last time, a quick, guilty look, and then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, and I was alone. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the door. I waited. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they would realize they had forgotten something and come back. I waited for the sound of the buzzer again. I waited for the door to open, but it never did. A few minutes later, another woman came into the waiting room. She was older, with a stern face. "Mia Carter?" she said. I nodded. "Come with me," she said. I followed her down a long, echoing hallway. The smell of disinfectant was stronger here. We passed doors with numbers on them. I could hear the faint sound of a television, the murmur of voices. She led me to a small room with 2 beds, 2 small dressers, and 1 window with bars on it. The girl, who looked about my age, was sitting on one of the beds, reading a book. She looked up when we came in, then looked away again, uninterested. "This is your room," the woman said. "That's your bed. Put your things in the dresser. Dinner is at 6, lights out at 9. The rules are on the back of the door." And then she left, closing the door behind her. I stood in the middle of the room, still holding my bag. I looked at the other girl. She didn't look at me. I looked at the bed. It had a thin mattress and a gray, scratchy-looking blanket. I finally understood. This wasn't a relative's house. This wasn't temporary. I looked at the sign on the wall, the one I couldn't read from the car. I could see a similar one through the barred window of my new room, on a building across a courtyard. This time, I could make out the letters. St. Jude's Home for Children. A home for children. An orphanage. My mom's words echoed in my head. It's temporary. I waited for them to come back. The first night, I barely slept. Every time I heard a noise in the hallway, I thought it was them. The next day, I just sat on my bed. I didn't talk to the other girl. I didn't do anything. I just waited. I watched the door. I waited all day. The second day was the same. I kept replaying the last conversation in my head. A short stay, temporary. They had to come back. They had to. Maybe they were just trying to scare me, to teach me a lesson for talking to my teacher. On the third day, a caseworker came to talk to me. Her name was Sarah. She asked me a lot of questions about my family, about school. I didn't answer most of them. I just kept asking her, when are my parents coming back? She had the same look in her eyes as the woman at the front desk, that look of pity. Mia, she said gently, your parents signed papers. They voluntarily relinquished their parental rights. I didn't know what relinquished meant, but I knew it was bad. They gave up custody, she explained. This is your home now. And that's when I finally understood. They weren't coming back. They had left me here. They had thrown me away. And they had lied. They had lied to me, and they had lied to everyone else. I spent the next 3 years in that place. 3 years of my life, from age 12 to 15, gone. Life at St. Jude's was all about routine. Wake up at 6:30, breakfast at 7, school in the building across the courtyard, lunch at noon, more classes, chores at 4, dinner at 6, free time until 8:30, lights out at 9. It wasn't a cruel place. No one hit me, no one starved me, but it was cold, emotionally cold. There were 50 other kids there, all of us with our own stories of loss and abandonment. The staff were overworked and tired. They were there to keep us safe and fed, not to love us. I learned to be even quieter, even more invisible than I had been at home. I did my schoolwork, I did my chores, I followed the rules. I didn't want to cause any trouble, because deep down, I still believed it was my fault. I had done something wrong. I had shamed my family, just like my mother said. This was my punishment. If I was good enough, if I was perfect enough, maybe they would change their minds. Maybe they would want me back. My roommate's name was Chloe. She had been there for 5 years. Her parents were addicts. She was tough, and she didn't talk about her past. She taught me the unspoken rules of the place. Don't cry where anyone can see you. Don't talk about your family. Don't get attached to anyone, because they'll either leave or you will. I never got any letters, no phone calls. On my 13th birthday, I watched the mail cart, hoping for a card. Nothing. Same on my 14th. On Christmas, the home would be filled with donated toys from local charities. I would take one, say thank you, and go to my room. The lie they told, that I was staying with relatives, it protected them. It meant no one in our small town would ask any difficult questions. No one from my old school would wonder where I went. My disappearance was neat and tidy. My Aunt Joanne knew the truth. I found that out later. She knew, and she went along with the lie. When people asked her how I was enjoying my time with our relatives, she would smile and say I was doing great. The shame was unbearable. I was an orphan, but I wasn't a real orphan. My parents were alive. They were living in my house, in my town, just an hour's drive away. They had just decided they didn't want me anymore. I used to lie in my bed at night and imagine what they were doing. Were they watching TV in the living room? Was my mom making dinner in the kitchen? Did they ever talk about me? Did they ever miss me? Or was it just easier? Was their life better without me? I became obsessed with the idea that I was a bad kid. I went over every memory from my childhood, looking for proof. The time I broke a plate, the time I talked back, the C I got in math. I built a case against myself. I was difficult. I was a burden. I was unlovable. It was the only thing that made sense, because the alternative was too painful to consider, that I had done nothing wrong, that they were just cruel. When I was 15, something changed. My caseworker, Sarah, called me into her office. She told me that a family was interested in becoming my foster parents. My first thought was, no, I didn't want another family. I wanted my own. But Sarah explained that at my age, my chances of being adopted were almost zero. Foster care was my only way out of St. Jude's. If I stayed, I would age out of the system at 18, and I'd be completely on my own. So I agreed. I was terrified, but the idea of leaving that cold, gray building was stronger than my fear. The couple, Mark and Susan, were nice. They were in their 40s and couldn't have children of their own. They lived in a different city, a bigger one. They had a small house with a yard. When I went to live with them, it was like learning to live on a different planet. It was quiet. No one yelled. They asked me questions about my day. Susan helped me with my homework. Mark taught me how to drive when I turned 16. They were kind, but I kept my distance. I couldn't let myself get attached. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was waiting for them to find the bad thing in me, the thing that had made my own parents get rid of me. I never told them the truth about my parents. I let them believe they were dead. It was easier than explaining. When I finished high school, I knew I couldn't stay with them forever. I didn't want to be a burden. I got a part-time job and enrolled in a local community college. I found a small apartment with a roommate. For the first time in my life, I was on my own, and I was okay. I was surviving. I worked my way through college. I got a degree in accounting. It was a safe, stable profession. It was all about numbers and rules. There was no emotion involved. It suited me. I built a life for myself, a quiet, orderly life. I have my own apartment now. I have a good job at a small firm. I have a few friends, but I don't let anyone get too close. I never talk about my childhood. If anyone asks, I just say I grew up in a different state. It's a vague, simple answer that stops any more questions. The wound was still there, though. A deep, invisible wound. Why did they do it? Why did they throw me away and then lie about it? For years, I told myself it didn't matter. The past was the past. I had a new life now. But it did matter. It was a huge, unanswered question at the center of my entire existence. A few years ago, when I was around 30, I got a Facebook message from a name I hadn't seen in years. It was a woman who used to be my next-door neighbor when I was a kid. Her name was Carol. Her message was short. "Mia, I don't know if you remember me, but I was so sorry to hear about your mother's passing." My blood went cold. My mother was dead. I stared at the message for a long time. I felt nothing. Just a strange, hollow emptiness. I wrote back a simple, "Thank you for letting me know." A part of me was curious. I started thinking about my father. Was he still alive? Was he still in that house? And the old question started burning in me again. Why? I knew I would never get the answer from them. My mother was gone. And my father? He would just say it was easier. But there had to be more to it. There had to be a real reason. That's when I decided to find out. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to try. I needed to understand what happened. Not for them, for me. I needed to know what crime I had supposedly committed that was so terrible they had to erase me from their lives. I started with the internet. I searched my father's name. I found his address. It was the same house, my childhood home. I thought about driving there, just showing up at the door. But what would I say? What would he do? The thought of seeing him again made me feel sick. So I tried something else. I remembered Sarah, my old caseworker from St. Jude's. I wondered if she was still working there. I looked up the number for the county social services department. I called, my hand shaking. I asked if there was any way to access my old case file. I explained that I had been in the system as a child and I was trying to understand my family history. The woman on the phone was skeptical. She said those records were sealed, but I was persistent. I gave her my name and date of birth. I told her the years I was at St. Jude's. She told me she would look into it and call me back. I didn't expect her to, but a week later, she did. She said that as an adult, I had the right to petition the court to unseal my own records. It was a long process, but it was possible. So I did it. I hired a lawyer. I filled out a mountain of paperwork. It took almost a year of waiting and wondering. And then one day, a thick manila envelope arrived in the mail, my file. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. My entire childhood was in that envelope. The answer to my question was in there somewhere. My hands were trembling as I opened it. It was full of legal documents, psychological evaluations, school reports. I started reading, and that's when I found it. It was a copy of the original report, the one from Child Protective Services, the one that had started everything. It was dated a few weeks before they sent me away. It detailed a report made by a teacher at my school, Mrs. Davison. It said that a student, Mia Carter, had disclosed that there was frequent loud fighting in her home and that she was scared. The report then detailed the follow-up visit from the social worker, the one I remembered. It described my mother, Linda Carter, as hostile and uncooperative. It said she denied everything and accused the school of lying. It described my father, Greg Carter, as passive and non-responsive. The social worker had written her assessment at the end of the report. She recommended a formal investigation and mandatory family counseling. She wrote, "There is concern that the child is living in an environment of high emotional distress and neglect." And then I saw the next document in the file. It was a formal notice of investigation sent to my parents. The papers in my lap feel heavy, weighted with more than just ink and pulp. They are dense with the truth I've spent a lifetime avoiding. I read the last sentence of the social worker's report for the 10th time. Recommend formal investigation and mandatory family counseling to address the volatile home environment. The words are printed in a neat, bureaucratic font, but they feel like they're screaming. For 22 years, I had built a case against myself. The evidence was simple. I had been the problem, and my parents had solved it by removing me. I had spoken out of turn, I had brought shame, I had broken the unspoken rule of our family, that everything was perfect, always. I was the flaw in the photograph. But this file, this clinical, state-issued stack of paper, tells a different story. It wasn't my fault. The thought doesn't land with the relief of absolution. There is no soaring feeling, no sudden lightness in my chest. The guilt I had mistaken for my own skin for so long begins to peel away, and underneath is not healing flesh, but a raw, cold anger. It settles deep in my bones, a chilling replacement for the familiar ache of self-blame. I hadn't ruined anything. They had. The fighting, the shouting, the silence that was louder than any noise, that was all theirs. Mrs. Davison hadn't betrayed me. She had tried to help me. The social worker, a woman named Carol Albright, whose name I don't remember, hadn't been a threat. She had been an offer of a lifeline. And my parents had looked at that lifeline, at the offer of counseling, of help, of a chance to fix what was broken, and decided it was easier to just let their daughter drown. It's easier, Mia. My father's words echo in my head, stripped of their tired, placating tone and imbued with a new, monstrous meaning. It was easier than standing up to my mother. It was easier than facing a counselor who might uncover the real rot beneath the perfect lawn and the clean curtains. It was easier to sign a form, drive 3 hours north, and pretend 1/3 of your family never existed. My mother, I can almost understand. Her anger was like a switch. Once flipped, it burned everything in its path. Shame was her greatest fear, and I had brought it to her doorstep in the form of a county-issued sedan. In her mind, I had exposed her, and for that, I had to be erased. It was a brutal, narcissistic logic, but it was a logic I recognized. I had lived with it my whole life. But my father, Greg, I close my eyes, and I'm back in the car, the vinyl of the back seat sticking to my legs. I see the back of his head, his hands steady on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. He didn't say a word the entire drive, not when my mother told me to stop crying, not when we pulled up to the imposing brick building of St. Jude's, not when he signed his name on the line next to hers. He just stood there, his face as blank as it was the day the social worker left our house. He didn't just let it happen. He drove the car. He chose her. He chose quiet. He chose easy. I open my eyes. The quiet in my meticulously ordered apartment feels different now. Usually it's a comfort, a shield I've built against the chaos of my childhood. Now it's the same heavy, waiting kind of quiet that filled our house. It feels like complicity. I place the file carefully on my coffee table, my hands moving with the precision I apply to my accounting work. Order and control. For years, they were my survival. Now, they just feel like another lie. My life isn't orderly. It's a sanitized crime scene, and I've just been handed the forensics report. My mother is dead. There are no answers there, no confrontation to be had, just a plot of earth in the same small-town cemetery she always worried people would gossip about her in. But my father is alive. A quick, shaking search on my phone confirms it. He still lives in that house, the same address, the same phone number. He is living in the rooms where I was raised and then unraised, sleeping in the bed he shared with the woman who threw me away, probably still cutting the lawn every Saturday. What was so terrible that erasing a child was the better option? What secrets were they so desperate to hide that family counseling was a bigger threat than abandonment? Was it just my mother's pride, or was there something else, something deeper that my father was complicit in hiding? The questions churn in my gut, hot and acidic. I spent my first few years at St. Jude's waiting. I waited for the phone to ring. I waited for a letter. I waited for the sound of their car in the gravel driveway. The waiting hollowed me out until there was nothing left to do but stop. I learned from Chloe, my first roommate with the old eyes and the chipped front tooth, that waiting was a fool's game. "They're not coming back," she'd said, not with cruelty, but with the flat finality of a seasoned expert. Nobody's parents ever come back. She was right. I'm not waiting anymore. I stand up, my legs stiff. The adult I am now, the one who pays her mortgage on time and has a respectable 401k, feels like a costume. Underneath, the 12-year-old girl is still there, but she's not crying anymore. She's looking at me, her expression hard, and asking what I'm going to do about it. I don't want an apology. An apology from a man like my father would be a worthless, hollow thing, just another easy way out. I don't want a reunion. The space where a father should be has been a scar for so long, I wouldn't know what to do with the actual man. I want him to see me. I want him to stand in a room with the daughter he threw away and be unable to look away. I want to be the one thing in his life that isn't easy. For 22 years, my absence has been his peace. I think it's time I disturb it. I walk to my closet and pull out a pair of sensible jeans and a plain gray sweater, the uniform of an unremarkable woman, the kind of person you'd never guess was piecing together a life from wreckage. I look at my reflection in the mirror. My face is calm. My eyes are dry. The storm is all on the inside. My keys are on the hook by the door. I grab them, the metal cool and solid in my palm. It's a 2-hour drive, maybe a little more with traffic. I can be there before dinner. I wonder what he eats for dinner now, alone in that quiet house. I wonder if he ever sets a place for me. The thought is absurd, a relic of a hope I thought I'd extinguished long ago. He doesn't think about me, but he's about to. I walk out of my apartment, the loud click of the lock snapping shut behind me, sounding just like the one I remember from my first night at St. Jude's, a door closing on one life and opening onto another. I don't think I decided to drive to my father's house. It was more like the decision was made for me, the moment the last page of the CPS report settled onto the stack. The anger wasn't a hot, blinding rage. the kind my mother specialized in. It wasn't loud or destructive. It was cold, like a block of ice had formed where my heart used to be, a dense, heavy certainty that left no room for doubt. For 22 years, I had carried the weight of their lie. Now, it was time to give it back. I left the file on my perfectly ordered desk, but its contents were seared into my memory. Parental reluctance to engage in court-mandated services, concerns over community perception, voluntary relinquishment as the preferred alternative. It was all so clinical, a series of bureaucratic phrases that translated to a simple, brutal truth. I was inconvenient. I was a stain on their perfect picture, and they had scrubbed me out. The engine of my sedan turned over with a quiet, efficient hum. It was a practical car, a sensible car, the kind of car a successful, well-adjusted 34-year-old woman would drive, a woman who had her life in order, a woman who definitely wasn't abandoned at an orphanage. The 2-hour drive north was a journey through a past I had tried to pave over. The city skyline receded in my rearview mirror, replaced by the familiar green of the suburbs, which then gave way to the rolling hills and dense woods of the countryside. The towns bled into one another, each with its own quaint main street, its own white-spired church. I knew this route by heart, not from visiting, but from the one-way trip I'd taken in the back of my parents' Buick, watching the world I knew disappear behind me. I kept the radio off. The silence in the car was absolute, a pressurized quiet that felt different from the waiting kind of quiet in my childhood home. This was the quiet of resolve. On the passenger seat, my leather handbag sat upright, containing only my wallet, my keys, and my phone, an arsenal of adulthood. I didn't need the file. The truth was inside me now, a cold, hard stone. He let her do it. That was the thought that looped, over and over. Greg, my father, the man whose silence had been a language of its own. I had spent my childhood trying to decipher it, thinking his quiet meant disapproval of my mother's moods, or sadness, or maybe even a secret alliance with me. The file corrected that misinterpretation. His silence wasn't passive. It was active. It was agreement. It was the signature on the dotted line. "It's easier, Mia. Just let it go." His words echoed from that last car ride. He had chosen easy. He had chosen a life without shouting, without slammed doors, without the inconvenience of a child who saw too much. He got his quiet life for 22 years. The sign for Northwood hadn't changed. "Welcome to Northwood, a great place to raise a family." The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. I drove past the town square, past the library where I'd learned to love books, past Miller's drugstore with its faded red awning. Nothing had changed. It was a town preserved in amber, a place where secrets were currency and appearances were everything. I understood now why the lie had worked so well. Staying with relatives was a plausible, tidy explanation. It required no follow-up questions, no uncomfortable truths. Aunt Joanne, my mother's sister, had probably helped sell it. A few sad sighs, a vague mention of family trouble down south. It would have been enough. I turned onto Sycamore Lane. The trees formed a perfect canopy over the street, dappling the pavement with gentle afternoon light. The houses were set back from the road, each with a manicured lawn and a 2-car garage. It was the street from a television commercial. And there, halfway down the block, was number 214, my house, the house. I pulled over to the curb a few doors down and just stared. The lawn was perfect, a neat green carpet. The hydrangeas my mother had doted on were in full, ostentatious bloom, big poofs of blue and purple. The windows were clean, the white curtains inside hanging just so. It was exactly the same. A lie told in blades of grass and carefully pruned shrubs. He had maintained the facade. Of course he had. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a house. It was a crime scene, and he was still living in it. Putting the car in park, I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. The little girl who had built a case against herself, who had memorized her own faults to justify her exile, was gone. The woman sitting in this car was an accountant. She dealt in facts and figures, in ledgers that had to balance. And this equation, the one that had defined her entire life, was off. It was time for an audit. My sensible shoes made almost no sound as I walked up the driveway. The concrete was the same, with a fine spiderweb of cracks near the bottom step that I used to trace with my finger. My hand closed over the cold wrought iron railing leading to the porch. I remembered my small hand gripping this same railing, pulling myself up the steps, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't wake my mother's anger. I stood before the navy blue door for a long moment. I could see my distorted reflection in the polished brass knocker. A tall, severe woman in dark slacks and a silk blouse, her hair pulled back in a tight knot. A stranger. I lifted my hand and pressed the doorbell. The chime that echoed from inside was the same two-note song that had signaled dinner or visitors or trouble. I waited, my posture rigid. I was no longer the girl waiting for them to come back for her. I was the consequence, arriving on the doorstep. I heard the shuffle of footsteps, slow and familiar. The lock turned, not the loud, definitive click of St. Jude's, but a soft, domestic tumble. The door sighed open. He was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just bigger. The 22 years had softened him, rounding his shoulders and thinning the sandy hair I'd inherited. His face, once blank, was now a roadmap of soft lines, the kind that come from not frowning or laughing too much. He wore a faded polo shirt and khaki pants. He looked like any other retiree in any other small town. He squinted, his eyes adjusting to the brightness. "Yes, can I help?" He stopped. His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish pulled from water. Recognition flickered, followed by a tidal wave of confusion. He hadn't seen me since I was a gangly, terrified 12-year-old. "Mia?" he whispered, the name a foreign object in his mouth. "My God, Mia? What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, the man who drove the car, the man who chose easy. The smell of the house drifted out, lemon polish and something else, something old and stuffy, the absence of life. "Hello, Greg," I said. My voice was level, devoid of any emotion. Using his first name was a conscious choice. It was a line drawn in the sand. I was not his daughter. I was the woman he had discarded. His face crumpled in on itself. He looked past me, up and down the perfect, quiet street, as if expecting to see someone else, as if my presence here was a mistake that could be corrected. "You should come in," he stammered, stepping back. I walked past him, over the threshold I had sworn I would never cross again. The air inside was still and cool. To the left was the living room, a museum of my mother's taste. The floral sofa was still covered in protective plastic. The porcelain figurines still stood untouched on the mantelpiece. Her ghost was everywhere. All the surfaces were clean, but a thin layer of dust coated everything, revealing his neglect. He was keeping the space, but not the spirit. He closed the door behind me, the sound shutting out the world. We stood in the foyer, two strangers bound by a terrible secret. It's been a long time," he said, his voice trembling. He was trying to find his footing, to pull the comfortable blanket of normalcy over this gaping hole in reality. "You look well. Can I get you something? Water? I think there's some iced tea." "I'm fine," I said, turning to face him fully. I let the silence stretch, watching him fidget. The quiet was a weapon now, and it was mine. "I was in the city," I said, my voice flat. "I didn't have my handbag. I had left it in the car. I didn't need any props." I stopped by the county records office. He blinked. The words meant nothing to him yet. Records? I took a step toward the living room and gestured to the glass coffee table, the one we were never allowed to put our feet on. "Let's sit down, Greg." He followed me numbly, like a man in a dream. He sat on the edge of the stiff, plastic-covered sofa. I remained standing, looking down at him. I had the advantage. I had the truth. "They unsealed them, you know," I continued, my voice calm, clinical. "The files. After a certain amount of time, it's standard procedure." A flicker of understanding, a shadow of fear crossed his face. The blankness was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. He was finally starting to read the numbers. He was starting to see that the columns didn't add up. "I read it all," I said. "The caseworker's notes, the recommendation for family counseling, Mom's refusal." I paused, letting each word land. "Your signature, next to hers, on the relinquishment form." He stared at me, his face ashen. The quiet, easy life he had built for himself over 2 decades was beginning to fracture. I could see the cracks spreading. "I know why you did it," I said, my voice dropping, the cold anger finally taking form. He flinched as if I had struck him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. There was nothing to say. There were no more lies to hide behind. I had brought the truth into this house, and it was taking up all the air. "I have a question for you, Greg," I said, leaning forward slightly. "It's the one thing the file didn't explain. I've been wondering about it for 22 years. He just stared, trapped. "When you drove away from St. Jude's," I asked, "and left me there, did you even look back?" The question hung in the stale air of the living room, heavy and suffocating. "Did you even look back?" My father's face, which had been a mask of slack-jawed shock, crumpled. It wasn't the sharp, sudden collapse of grief, but the slow, tired deflation of a man who has spent a lifetime avoiding pressure. His gaze dropped from my eyes to the worn floral pattern of the armchair where my mother used to sit. The grandfather clock in the hall, the one he polished every Sunday, ticked with an unnerving loudness, marking the seconds of his silence. He shook his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Mia, what does it matter now?" he mumbled, his voice thin as old paper. And there it was, not an answer, but an evasion. The same tactic he'd used my entire childhood. The same moral cowardice that had signed a form and driven away. The anger I had cultivated for the 22-year drive here, the cold, clean anger from the file, began to feel like a borrowed coat, ill-fitting and useless. It couldn't keep out the chill of this room. "It matters because it was a Tuesday," I said, my voice flat. I kept it level, like I was balancing accounts. Emotion was a liability. "It was September 10th. The sky was overcast. You were wearing a blue polo shirt, the one with the little alligator on it. You told me to get my jacket. I thought we were going to the store. I remember every detail of that day, and you're telling me you don't remember the last time you saw your only child?" He flinched. He ran a hand over his thinning gray hair, a gesture I recognized as his tell for when my mother was about to start shouting, a reflexive, preemptive surrender. "It was difficult," he said, still looking at the empty chair. He was speaking to her ghost, not to me. "Your mother, she wasn't well." "I know she wasn't well," I countered, leaning forward slightly, the file a solid weight on my lap. "I was the one who lived with it. I was the one who learned to read the weather in her eyes. But this," I tapped the manila folder, "this wasn't about her being unwell. This was about counseling." His eyes finally darted to mine, wide with the flicker of panic. "That's what this says," I continued, my voice mercilessly calm. "A social worker named Mrs. Albright recommended 6 weeks of mandatory family counseling. Not for me, for all of us. Because I told a teacher you two fought. That's all I did. And your response, your solution to avoid 6 weeks of talking, was to sign away your daughter. It was easier, you said. You don't understand, he whispered, his hands twisting together in his lap. You never understood what she was like. I understood perfectly, I said. The words were cold and sharp in my own ears. I understood that the lawn had to be perfect. I understood that the neighbors could never hear a raised voice. I understood that shame was the worst possible sin. What I don't understand is what secret was so terrible that you would throw me away to protect it. What was so awful that talking to a professional was worse than this? He shrank back into the cushions. The silence stretched again, thicker this time, filled with the ghosts of 2 decades. I watched him, this man who was half of my DNA, and felt nothing but a vast clinical distance. I was an auditor, and his life was a fraudulent ledger. It wasn't my secret to tell, he finally choked out. My blood ran cold. It wasn't his secret, it was hers. Of course it was. Everything had always been about her. His life, my life, we were just supporting characters in the frantic, desperate drama of Linda Carter. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The pieces clicked into place with a quiet, devastating finality. She'd been through it before, hadn't she? He didn't have to answer. The truth was written in the sudden pallor of his skin, the way his eyes glazed over with a memory that was clearly not his own. Counseling, a facility, the system, I said, the words coming to me as if I were reading them from the file. She'd been there, and she would have died before anyone in this town knew. Before the perfect image she built for herself got a single crack in it. A court-ordered therapist would have seen it. They would have uncovered it all. He just stared, his mouth slightly agape. He looked ancient. Your mother, he started, his voice cracking. When she was 16, her parents sent her away. To a place, a state hospital, for a year. They told everyone she was staying with relatives in Ohio. He said the words with a dull, rote horror, as if reciting a catechism, my own lie, handed down from a previous generation. It broke something in her. When she got out, she swore no one would ever have that kind of power over her again, that no one would ever know. When Mrs. Albright mentioned mandatory sessions, she saw the same walls closing in. She said they would take her away again, that you were how they were going to do it. The air left my lungs. It wasn't that I was a source of shame. I was the weapon she imagined was being turned against her. My small, clumsy cry for help had been interpreted as an act of ultimate betrayal, a trigger for a past trauma so profound she would rather amputate a part of her own life than risk reopening the wound. And my father, the man sworn to protect me, had held the knife. So you let her, I said. It wasn't a question. You let her cut me out, to keep her quiet, to keep your life peaceful. It really was just easier. He gave a single jerky nod. A tear finally traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. It was a pathetic, self-pitying tear that did nothing to move me. I had waited 22 years for this conversation, imagining shouting matches, tearful reconciliations, dramatic confessions. I had expected to feel rage or vindication, or even a sliver of pity. I felt nothing. The anger was gone, burned away by the truth, and in its place was a hollow, echoing emptiness. The man in front of me wasn't a monster. He was worse. He was a void, a man so terrified of conflict that he had sacrificed his own child on the altar of a quiet life. He hadn't chosen my mother over me. He had chosen the absence of noise. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. My joints ached. I looked around the room, at the faded photographs on the mantelpiece, all of them taken before I turned 12, at the dusty glass figurines inside a cabinet. This wasn't my home. It was a museum dedicated to a lie, and he was its lonely, shuffling curator. "I have one more question," I said, my voice steady. He looked up, his eyes pleading, as if begging me not to ask. "The day you left me at St. Jude's, you walked me to the door. You handed my suitcase to a woman. You told me to be good. And then you turned around and walked back to the car." I paused, letting him inhabit the memory. "My question is, what did you have for dinner that night?" His face contorted in confusion. "What? Dinner?" I repeated. "When you got back home, to this house, what did you and Mom eat for dinner? Did she cook? Did you get takeout? I want to know what normal life looked like right after you threw yours away." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He had no answer, because it was a normal night. Of course it was. That was the whole point. For them, my absence was the price of admission back to normalcy. For me, it was the end of the world. For him, it was just a Tuesday. I didn't wait for him to find the words. I turned, walked through the hallway, past the ticking clock, and opened the front door. I didn't slam it. I closed it gently behind me, the click of the latch, soft but final. I got in my car and sat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I did not cry. The neat, orderly accountant in my brain was already closing the books on this account. The debt had been explained. It could never be paid. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, and this time I was the one who didn't look back. The road stretched out in front of me, a long gray ribbon of asphalt leading away from the town where I was born. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time in my life, it felt like the direction was my own. The file lay on the passenger seat, a silent testament to a story that was finally, irrevocably mine. I drove. My hands were steady on the wheel, my foot a constant, even pressure on the gas. The turn signal clicked with a clean, metronomic rhythm at every intersection. I noted the halos of moisture around the streetlights, a misting rain beginning to fall. I saw the blur of a couple walking a dog, their faces hidden under the shared dome of an umbrella. The world outside my windshield was ordinary, proceeding with a logic I could no longer access. Inside the car, a different kind of quiet had fallen. It wasn't the heavy, waiting kind of quiet from my childhood, pregnant with the threat of my mother's anger. This was a hollowed-out silence, a vacuum, the space where a question had lived for 22 years. A quiet life. The phrase echoed in the emptiness. It wasn't shouted like my mother's accusations. It was spoken in my father's defeated tone, a soft, reasonable poison. He had traded me for quiet, for an absence of conflict. He had looked at his life, at the wife he was too afraid to confront, and the daughter he was supposed to protect, and he had made a simple calculation. It was easier. I don't remember the specifics of the drive back to my apartment. It's a 40-minute trip I could do in my sleep, and maybe I did. My body, the part of me trained in routines and self-sufficiency, took over. It navigated the streets, parked the car in its designated spot, and turned off the engine. The click of the ignition powering down was unnervingly loud. For a moment, I just sat there in the parking garage, the only light coming from the concrete and steel fixtures overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. And I was alone. Again. The feeling was so familiar it was almost comforting, like the ache of an old injury. But this was different. Before, the loneliness had been a question mark. Why? What did I do? Now, it was a period, a definitive, brutal end stop. I was not abandoned in a fit of rage. I was discarded as an inconvenience. My apartment was exactly as I had left it, orderly. The throw pillows on the sofa were arranged just so. The stack of professional journals on my coffee table was perfectly squared. My entire life was a testament to control, a carefully constructed fortress against the chaos I had come from. I had built a world where everything had its place, where there were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no secrets festering under the floorboards. I walked to the kitchen and filled the kettle. my movements precise and automatic. I would make tea. I would sit on my perfect sofa. I would turn on the television and watch something mindless. This is what the adult Mia Carter did. She managed. She coped. But as I reached for a mug, my hand started to shake. It was a fine tremor at first, barely perceptible. Then it grew, a violent, rattling shudder that traveled up my arm. The ceramic mug slipped from my grasp, hitting the granite countertop with a sharp crack before shattering on the tile floor. I stared at the white shards. A spider web of fractures spread from the point of impact on the tile. And just like that, the fortress crumbled. The answer was worse. The answer I had spent my entire adult life searching for, the one I'd built into a monstrous, shadowy thing in the back of my mind, was small and pathetic and somehow infinitely more cruel than any monster I could have imagined. My mother, Linda, wasn't just volatile, she was fragile, terrified of her own past, of a history of mental instability she had papered over with a perfect lawn and a respectable husband. And my father, Greg, wasn't just passive, he was a coward. He was a man who chose the path of least resistance, even when that path led over his own child. They hadn't sent me away to punish me, they sent me away to save themselves. The mandatory counseling would have been a crack in my mother's facade, and my father's quiet life would have been the price. I was the price. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold cabinets, uncaring of the ceramic fragments around me. The sob that escaped me was a foreign sound in this silent apartment. It was a raw, ugly noise, ripped from a place 12 years deep. It wasn't a cry of self-pity, it was a cry of pure, unadulterated grief for the little girl who had blamed herself. The girl who had sat on the edge of a bed at St. Jude's, cataloging her own faults, trying to figure out which sin had been the unforgivable one. The talking to the teacher, the messy room, the C+ on a history test. It was none of those things. My only crime was existing. My only crime was being a problem they could solve by signing a piece of paper. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the tears subsided, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. The grief was still there, a stone in my gut, but something else was taking shape around it. The truth. Not their version of it, not the whisper campaign of staying with relatives. The real thing. I stood up, my knees aching. I carefully swept up the broken mug, my hands steady once more, and deposited the pieces into the trash. The act felt symbolic. Something was broken, and it could not be fixed. It could only be cleaned up. I walked into my small home office. On my desk, next to my laptop and a neat stack of bills, was the manila envelope from the county, the CPS file. I had read it, yes, but I had read it searching for a clue. Now I knew the context. I knew the secret that wasn't written in the clinical, bureaucratic language. I pulled out the thin sheaf of papers. Parents cited inability to cope. Father stated a desire for a return to normalcy. Mother declined to be interviewed further. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. For so long, I had been haunted by the lie. Now I felt crushed by the truth. My gaze drifted to the bookshelf. On the bottom shelf, tucked behind a row of accounting textbooks, was a photo album. It was the only one I had taken from my father's house years ago, before the silences between us had stretched into an impassable gulf. My mother had curated these albums with an almost religious fervor. I pulled it out. The cover was padded blue leather, with the words "Our Family" embossed in gold. I opened it. There we were, a family. Me at 7, missing my 2 front teeth, holding a sparkler on the 4th of July. My father is flipping burgers at the grill, a forced, wide smile on his face. My mother is sitting in a lawn chair, her posture perfect, her hair immaculate, her eyes holding a familiar, blazing tension. The perfect house is in the background, the lawn a sheet of green velvet. I turned the page. Christmas. Me in a red velvet dress, holding a doll. My parents are standing behind me, their hands on my shoulders. A perfect family in front of a perfect tree. Lie. Another page. A vacation to the shore. Me, age 10, building a sandcastle. My mother is watching from a distance, not helping, but ensuring the picture looks right. Lie. I flipped through the glossy plastic-covered pages, one after another, a gallery of falsehoods. Each smiling photo was an act of propaganda, a desperate attempt by my mother to project an image of a life she wasn't living, and a desperate attempt by my father to pretend he believed it. I closed the album. The weight of it felt obscene. For years, I had held on to it, a small, pathetic part of me, hoping that the images held some kernel of truth, that maybe in those fleeting moments we had been real. I picked up the thin CPS file. It was light, just a few pages held together by a staple. It was ugly, filled with sterile language and cold facts, but it was the truth. I walked back to the bookshelf. I slid the blue photo album back into its place, behind the heavy textbooks. Then I took the manila envelope and placed it in front of the album, creating a barrier. The truth standing guard over the lie. A quiet life. He had gotten what he wanted. He had his quiet. My mother had her secrets, which she took to her grave. And I had the truth. It was a cold, bitter inheritance, but it was mine. I stood there in my silent, orderly apartment, the streetlights outside beginning to fade as the sky turned a bruised purple. The question that had defined me, that had driven my every action, was gone. The gaping hole in my past had been filled, not with a monster, but with a pair of ordinary, weak people. It was over. For the first time in 22 years, I didn't know what came next. The thought wasn't terrifying. It was quiet. It was empty. It was a beginning. The sound of my car door shutting was unnaturally loud in the quiet suburban street. It was a solid, definitive thud, an ending. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine rumbled to life, another noise that felt intrusive, like shouting in a library. I didn't look back at my father's house. I didn't need to. There was nothing left there for me to see. The drive back to my apartment is a blur. I remember the rhythmic sweep of the wipers clearing away a light drizzle, the red glare of taillights bleeding across the wet asphalt, the city lights smeared into long, indistinct trails of neon and white. My hands were steady on the wheel, my foot consistent on the accelerator. On the outside, I was a woman driving home from a visit. Inside, I was a building collapsing in on itself, floor by floor, in slow, silent motion. Easier. The word wasn't an echo. It was a physical presence in the car with me. It sat in the passenger seat where my mother had sat on that final drive, a ghost made of a single, selfish syllable. It was easier to cut out a part of your life than to face it. It was easier to throw a child away than to do the work. My father, Greg Carter, the man who taught me how to ride a bike and checked for monsters under my bed, had summed up the defining tragedy of my life with the logic of a man choosing which route to take to work, the one with less traffic, the one that was easier. I parked in my designated spot beneath my apartment building, the concrete pillars rising around me like the legs of a cold, indifferent animal. I walked through the lobby, my keys jingling softly, the sound sharp in the empty space. The elevator ride was silent. My apartment, when I unlocked the door, was exactly as I had left it, spotless, orderly. The first thing I always do when I get home is take off my shoes and place them side by side in the entryway closet. I did that. I hung my coat on its designated hook. I placed my purse on the small console table. These were the rituals that had kept me tethered to the world for 22 years. They were the small acts of control that proved I was not my mother, that my life was not a chaotic, screaming mess. But tonight, the rituals felt hollow. They were the motions of a person I no longer was. I walked into my kitchen. The stainless steel appliances gleamed under the track lighting. The quartz countertop was a pristine, unbroken expanse of white. I had built this life, this sterile, perfect box, as a fortress against the question that had haunted me: why? I had built a case against myself, brick by painstaking brick, believing that if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, I could retroactively earn the love I'd been denied. I'd become an accountant. My entire career was based on making things add up, on balancing the ledger until it was perfect. Now the ledger was balanced, and the answer was uglier and sadder than any I had ever imagined. It wasn't my fault. The thought was so foreign it felt like it belonged to someone else. For 2 decades, my guilt had been a part of my anatomy, an organ I couldn't live without. I was the girl who had broken her family because she told a secret. I was the cause. But it was a lie I had carried for them. I leaned my hands against the cool, smooth stone of the counter. I saw my father's face, not as the monster of my childhood nightmares, but as something far worse, a weak, tired man, a coward. He hadn't been protecting me. He hadn't even really been protecting my mother. He had been protecting himself, his quiet, his peace. He had chosen a life without shouting over a life with his daughter. There was a unique, bitter poison in that realization. Malice, I could have understood. Hatred, I could have fought. But I had been discarded for the sake of convenience, an inconvenience. And then there was my mother, Linda. For my entire life, she had been a storm, a force of nature whose moods dictated the weather of our home. Her anger was like a switch, her love a currency she doled out and snatched back without warning. In my memory, she was a giant, but my father's words had shrunk her. He had given me a new image to replace the monster, a terrified teenager, locked away in a place she couldn't escape, her own secret shame so profound that she would sacrifice her own child to keep it buried. I saw her, suddenly, not as my mother, but as a girl my own age when I was left at St. Jude's, a girl whose own parents had discarded her. The cycle didn't excuse her. It would never excuse what she did. The abuse, the abandonment, that was hers to own. But for the first time, a sliver of something other than fear or anger pierced through me. It was a cold, desolate pity. She had been broken long before she broke me. She had been handed a legacy of abandonment, and she had passed it down, the only inheritance she had to give. My blood ran cold. I wasn't just my mother's daughter. I was the granddaughter of people who had put their own child away. It was in my lineage. The silence in my apartment pressed in. It was a different kind of quiet from the one at my parents' house. That had been a heavy, waiting kind of quiet, the breath held before a scream. This was the quiet of a vacuum, the quiet of a space that has had all the air sucked out of it. The central question of my life was gone, and its absence was a gaping hole. Who was I, if not the girl who was left behind? Who was I without the guilt? My hands were shaking. I went to the cabinet to get a glass for water, my movements stiff and automatic. My fingers fumbled, clumsy and foreign. The glass slipped. It didn't just drop. It felt like it flew from my hand, arcing through the air for a split second before it hit the polished concrete floor. The sound was a gunshot, a sharp, violent crack that shattered the stillness. Shards of glass skittered across the floor, glittering like cruel little stars under the kitchen lights. My first instinct, my drilled-in 22-year-old instinct, was to move, to get the dustpan, the brush, to sweep up the mess, erase the evidence of breakage, restore the order. That's who I was. I was the one who cleaned things up. But I didn't move. I stood perfectly still, my feet just inches from the jagged pieces. I looked at the mess. A beautiful, perfect thing, now just a collection of sharp, useless fragments. It couldn't be put back together. It would never be a glass again. A sob caught in my throat, thick and painful. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a cry of release. The pressure that had been building inside me for my entire life, the tight, orderly knot of shame and confusion, finally snapped. I didn't bend down to clean it up. I looked at the shattered glass, at the chaos on my perfect floor, and I saw the truth. You can't fix what's broken by pretending it's whole. You can't build a lie on a lie, even if the lie is your own fault. My father's cowardice and my mother's trauma were not my mess to clean up. They never had been. I took a slow, deliberate step back, away from the broken pieces. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving the shards to glitter in the dark. The mess could wait. It would still be there in the morning. For the first time in 22 years, I felt something other than the need to be perfect. I didn't know what it was, this strange, hollowed-out feeling in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't peace. But it wasn't the suffocating weight of the past either. It was space, and I was alone in it. Finally, truly alone. Not abandoned, but free. He closed the door. The sound was soft, a quiet click that seemed impossibly loud in the suburban stillness. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood on his perfectly edged concrete walkway, the one that led to the perfectly manicured lawn, and stared at the wood grain of the door that had just sealed him away from me forever. And I was alone, again. My car keys were a sharp, metallic weight in my palm. I squeezed them, the teeth digging into my skin, just to feel something real. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the street, and somewhere nearby, a lawnmower droned on, a sound of relentless, ordinary life that felt like a personal insult. I had spent 22 years building a case against myself, arranging the facts of my childhood into a narrative that proved my own guilt. I was difficult. I was the source of the fighting. I was the problem they had to solve. Now, the entire foundation of my life, the central pillar of my identity, was gone. It hadn't just cracked, it had been obliterated by a single, pathetic admission. It was easier. The drive back to the city was a blur of green highway signs and the red taillights of other cars. I drove on autopilot, my hand steady on the wheel, my foot applying just the right pressure to the gas. On the outside, I was a responsible adult driving home at dusk. Inside, I was free falling through a black, silent void. The question was gone. The one I had carried for 22 years. The one that had woken me up at night and sat with me at every lonely dinner. Why? It had been the engine of my life, the dark star my entire universe orbited. It had shaped every choice I made, from my career in accounting, a profession of absolute verifiable facts, to the sterile order of my apartment. Everything was a reaction to that one unanswered question. Now there was just silence where it used to be, a hollow space. I hadn't been a problem to be solved. I had been an inconvenience to be removed, a line item on a budget of emotional convenience, easily deleted. They hadn't gotten rid of me because I was bad. They had gotten rid of me because it was simpler than getting help. It wasn't a punishment. It was an administrative decision. My blood ran cold. Somehow, that was infinitely worse. A punishment implies you did something to deserve it. This was nothing. I was nothing. Just a piece to be swept off the board so the game could be more pleasant for the remaining players. My mother's face swam in my memory. Linda, not the monster of my childhood nightmares, but a terrified woman, so broken by her own past that the thought of a therapist looking at her was more frightening than abandoning her own child. The knowledge didn't bring compassion. It didn't bring forgiveness. It brought a chilling, horrifying clarity. Her cruelty hadn't been random flashes of anger. It was the desperate, frantic thrashing of a caged animal, and I was the thing she had to chew off to get free. And my father, Greg, the quiet accomplice, his sin wasn't passion or fury. It was a profound and bottomless cowardice. He chose peace over his own daughter. He drove the car. He signed the papers. He walked away and let the lie settle over our family like a shroud. Staying with relatives. It wasn't just a cover story for the neighbors. It was the title of my erasure. It made my absence neat, polite, and bearable. It allowed him to sleep at night. I thought of Aunt Joanne, of her stilted phone calls and the Christmas cards that stopped coming. She knew. Of course she knew. They had all participated in constructing the quiet, tidy tomb where my childhood was buried. By the time I pulled into the parking garage beneath my apartment building, the sky was a deep, starless indigo. The silence of the concrete structure was absolute. My footsteps echoed as I walked to the elevator, the sound sharp and lonely. My apartment door opened with a familiar click. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it. The faint, clean smell of lemon and lavender. The mail stacked in a neat rectangle on the console table. The throw pillows on the sofa arranged at perfect right angles. For years, this order had been my refuge, my proof that I was not the chaotic, unlovable child I believed myself to be. It was my armor. I walked through the living room and into the kitchen, my movements stiff. The space felt alien, like a showroom. All this order, all this control, it was a defense against an enemy that never existed. I had been shadowboxing with my own ghost. I opened the refrigerator, the cool air washing over my face. I stood there for a moment, staring at the neatly organized containers of prepped vegetables and the row of sparkling water. But I didn't know what I was looking for. I closed the door without taking anything. I drifted to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, the duvet cover smooth and unwrinkled. The weight of the last 22 years pressed down on me, but it was a different weight now. The heavy, familiar coat of guilt was gone. I searched for it, for that old, painful comfort of self-blame, and found nothing. In its place was a terrifying emptiness. If I wasn't the girl who ruined her family, who was I? If my life wasn't a penance, what was it? The tears I expected didn't come. There was no storm of grief, no explosion of rage. There was only this vast, cold, desolate calm. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the fighting is over, littered with the wreckage of a life I thought I knew. I had been fighting the wrong war. I saw my reflection in the dark glass of the bedroom window, a woman with a pale, still face and hollow eyes, a stranger. For my entire adult life, I had been Mia Carter, the girl who survived being a bad kid, the girl who pulled herself up, who built a life out of discipline and sheer will to prove she was worthy after all. It was all a lie. I stood up and walked to the small desk in the corner of the room. The manila folder from the county records office was sitting right where I'd left it, my CPS file. I picked it up, the flimsy cardboard suddenly feeling like a slab of stone. I didn't need to open it. I knew what it said. But now, the clinical, bureaucratic words held a new and terrible power. Parents have voluntarily relinquished their rights. Mother is unwilling to participate in court-mandated counseling, citing extreme emotional distress. Father concurs. Father concurs. I let the folder slip from my fingers. It landed on the floor with a soft, final thud. I wasn't the monster in my own story. I was the sacrifice. I wasn't the reason the house was burning. I was the thing they threw into the fire to save themselves. And the question that rose from the ashes wasn't why anymore. It was something far more terrifying. Now what? The engine hummed, a low, steady sound that filled the space my own breathing couldn't. The truth was a stone in my gut, heavy and cold. Outside, the streetlights of my father's quiet neighborhood smeared across the passenger window, blurry streaks of orange and white. I didn't watch them. I watched the reflection of my own face, pale and still, superimposed over the passing world. He said it was easier. The words echoed in the silence of my car, more damning than any shout. Easier than fighting with her. Easier than facing the shame. Easier than being a father. For 22 years, I had built a case against myself, piece by painstaking piece. I was difficult. I was moody. I was the one who broke the family's fragile silence by speaking to a teacher. The verdict was always the same: guilty. My abandonment was the sentence I had earned. But it was a lie. All of it. The foundation of my life, the central organizing principle of my own worthlessness, had been obliterated in a single pathetic confession. I wasn't a bad kid. I was just inconvenient. The drive back to the city was long, an hour and a half of highway, of anonymous headlights approaching and then vanishing in my rearview mirror. I felt strangely disconnected from the act of driving, as if my hands on the wheel and my foot on the gas belonged to someone else. The real me was suspended in that new, hollow space my father's words had carved out. I thought of my mother. Not the monster with the blazing eyes, but the terrified teenager she must have been, locked away in some institution that smelled of disinfectant and despair, just like St. Jude's. For a dizzying second, a wave of pity washed over me. It was a foreign, unwelcome emotion. Pity for her? Linda Carter didn't invite pity. She commanded fear, demanded obedience, and traded in shame. And yet, I saw it, a flicker of a connection, a terrible shared inheritance. We were both girls who had been put away. The pity was quickly consumed by something else, a cold anger, a quiet, clarifying fury that was nothing like my mother's explosive rage. Her anger was a storm, loud and destructive, and then gone, leaving wreckage in its wake. This was different. This was the slow, grinding pressure of a glacier. It was an anger at him, at Greg, my father, the man whose defining characteristic was a shrug, the man who saw his drowning child and decided it was easier to just walk away. My mother had been a force of nature, a hurricane of her own trauma, but he had been the flood wall that chose to break. When I finally pulled into my designated spot in the parking garage beneath my apartment building, the silence that followed the engine's cutoff was absolute. It pressed in on me. I didn't move for a long time. The concrete walls of the garage felt like a tomb. Even now, at 34, I find safety and order. My apartment is my sanctuary for that very reason. It is a one-bedroom testament to control. The books on the shelves are organized by genre and author. The throw pillows on the sofa are always centered. In the kitchen, the spice jars are alphabetized. It's a life measured in right angles and balanced ledgers. It is the complete opposite of the house I grew up in, and the polar opposite of the chaotic dormitories of St. Jude's. I unlocked my door, a solid modern lock, not the ancient rattling kind from the orphanage, and stepped inside. The air was still and smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I used on the wood floors. I dropped my keys in the small ceramic bowl on the console table, the clink of metal on glaze the only sound. I took off my coat and hung it in the closet. I walked into the living room and stood in the center of the rug. For 22 years, guilt had been a tenant in my body. It was a constant, low-grade fever, a weight on my chest that I had grown so accustomed to, I barely noticed it was there. It had shaped my choices, dictated my relationships, and kept me small and quiet. Now the space was empty. The absence of it was terrifying. It was a physical sensation, like I had suddenly lost a limb. I was lighter, but unmoored. There was nothing to brace against. I stood in the middle of my perfect, orderly living room and felt a profound, bottomless emptiness. I had spent my entire adult life running from a ghost, only to find out the ghost was never chasing me at all. I had just been running from myself. I walked to the closet in my small home office and pulled out the cardboard box, the records from the court. The file felt different in my hands now, lighter. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and lifted the lid. The smell of old paper and bureaucratic ink filled the air. I didn't need to read the documents again. The words were branded onto my memory. Relinquishment of parental rights. Before, those words had felt like a judgment, a formal declaration of my failure as a daughter. Now, they were just a statement of fact, a transaction. They had relinquished their rights. They had signed me over like a faulty appliance they didn't want to pay to repair. Parents declined to engage in prescribed therapeutic services. The shame of it all finally landed, but it wasn't my own. It was theirs. The suffocating, cowardly shame of two adults who broke their own child rather than face their own reflections. My mother, terrified of the past repeating itself. My father, terrified of the difficult conversation. And me, the living, breathing consequence of their combined fears. I slowly leafed through the pages. The social worker's dry, clinical notes. The description of my room. The mention of my conversation with Mrs. Davison. It was all there, a neat and tidy narrative of a family's collapse. But the real story? The one about a girl locked in a hospital and a man who always chose the path of least resistance, wasn't in the file. It was hidden in the negative space, in the lines they never wrote. I closed the file and put it back in the box. I should have felt relieved, vindicated, free. But I didn't. I just felt hollow. The story I had told myself about who I was, the story of the bad kid who deserved it, was gone. And I didn't know what story to put in its place. Who am I if I'm not the girl who was thrown away? If the blame isn't mine, the guilt isn't mine, then what is? What's left of me? I looked around my apartment, the clean lines, the muted colors, the obsessive order. I had built this life as a fortress against the chaos of my past. I had become an accountant, a profession dedicated to finding order in numbers, to making everything add up. But nothing added up. It never had. My whole life was a reaction to a trauma, and the trauma wasn't what I thought it was. Is a fortress still a home when the war is over? Or is it just a prison you built for yourself? The question that drove me for 2 decades, why, was answered. Its absence is a strange kind of vertigo. For so long I had a direction, a singular focus, find the truth, understand. Now the truth was here, sitting in a cardboard box on my floor, and it had offered no peace. Guilt had been a compass, its needle always pointing north, toward my own perceived failure. It was a terrible guide, but it was a guide nonetheless. Now the needle just spins. I drove. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my foot steady on the accelerator. The tidy suburban streets of my father's neighborhood bled into the wider, more anonymous lanes of the highway. Streetlights smeared across the windshield like yellow paint, a watercolor wash over a world that had lost its sharp edges. I don't know how long I drove for, or where I was going. There was just the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires on the pavement, a mechanical heartbeat, keeping time for a woman whose own heart felt like a hollow, silent chamber. His words weren't echoing, they weren't screaming in my head. They were just there, a fact, a piece of data I had finally acquired after a lifetime of searching. She was afraid they'd lock her up again, like when she was a girl. It was just easier this way, Mia. Easier. The truth wasn't a cleansing fire. It wasn't a wave of relief that washed over me, absolving me of 22 years of self-imposed guilt. There was no cinematic moment of catharsis, no flood of righteous anger. There was only a vast, quiet, and terrifying emptiness. The guilt, I realized, had been a kind of companion. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, but it had weight. It had substance. It was the scaffolding I had built my entire adult life around. The meticulous ledgers, the orderly apartment, the carefully controlled emotions. Everything was a reaction to the chaos I believed I had caused, a penance for the bad kid I had been. And now, the scaffolding was gone, kicked out from under me by one tired, selfish confession. All that was left was the unfinished structure of myself, exposed to the cold night air. I wasn't the bad kid. I was just inconvenient. The thought didn't land with a crash. It landed with the soft, sickening finality of a shovelful of dirt on a coffin. My entire life, my core identity, had been built on a foundation of lies. Not just their lie to the world, but my lie to myself. I had built a case against myself, meticulously gathering evidence of my own inadequacy. The time I talked back, the B+ on a report card, the messy room. It was all proof that I had earned my exile. But the real reason had nothing to do with me. I was a casualty of a war that started before I was born, collateral damage in my mother's lifelong battle with her own demons. My father wasn't a co-conspirator in some grand malicious plot. He was just a man who took the path of least resistance, a man who chose a quiet house over a daughter. My hands began to tremble, the vibration traveling up my arms. I pulled over, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder of a dark, unfamiliar road. I cut the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute, broken only by my own ragged breathing. I looked at my reflection in the dark rearview mirror. The same orderly haircut, the same sensible blouse, the face of Mia Carter, CPA, a woman who balanced books and paid her bills on time, a phantom, a character I had been playing for so long I'd forgotten it was a role. Without a conscious decision, I knew where I had to go. I put the car in gear and pulled back onto the road, my movements stiff and automatic. I didn't need GPS. The route was etched into a part of my brain I never accessed, a map drawn in invisible ink. It took another 20 minutes. The neighborhoods grew older, the streetlights more infrequent. And then I saw it. St. Jude's Home for Children. It looked smaller than I remembered, but no less imposing. The same grim institutional brick, the same symmetrical rows of dark windows. Some of them still had the subtle cross-hatching of reinforced mesh in the glass, a detail I'd forgotten. The sign out front was newer, the lettering a bland, modern font, but the name was the same. A cruel irony, naming a place of abandonment after the patron saint of lost causes. I parked across the street, just as my father had done all those years ago. The engine ticked as it cooled. I stared at the building, the place where Mia Carter, the girl, had ended, and where the ghost I was now had been born. I remembered the loud click of the heavy door locking behind me, the smell of disinfectant and boiled cabbage, the determined blankness I had perfected, a mask to hide the terrified child who waited every single day for a car to pull up, for a mistake to be corrected. The emptiness inside me began to curdle. It started as a low heat in my stomach, a slow burn that began to climb up my chest. It was easier than family counseling, easier than confronting a troubled wife, easier than being a father. He had stood by, passive and blank-faced, and let my mother sacrifice me to her ghosts. He had packed my bag. He had driven the car. He had traded his only child for peace and quiet. He let me believe for more than 2 decades that it was my fault, because that, too, was easier. It required nothing of him. No apology, no explanation, no responsibility. The heat in my chest flared into a blaze. This was it. This was the anger. It wasn't the clean, righteous fury I had imagined. It was ugly and raw and jagged. It was a feral thing, and it was directed at all of it. At my mother's weakness and my father's cowardice. At the barred windows that were a monument to their fear, not my delinquency. At the lie about staying with relatives, a flimsy shield for their shame. But most of all, the anger was for the 12-year-old girl I had been. The girl who sat in the back of the car, silent and confused, building a case against herself. The girl who learned to be invisible, to take up less space, to expect nothing. The girl who spent years staring out those windows, waiting for parents who were never, ever coming back, because they were sitting in their quiet, perfect house, relieved. I got out of the car. The night air was cold and damp, smelling of wet pavement and decaying leaves. I walked to the black iron fence that surrounded the property. My fingers, the ones that spent their days on a calculator and a keyboard, curled around the cold metal bars. I looked up at the window I knew had been mine, 3rd floor, 4th from the left. It was dark, of course, just another black square in a wall of bricks. But I could see her. I could see the small, wiry girl with the braid down her back, kneeling on her cot, her forehead pressed against the cool glass. Waiting, hoping, making promises to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. I'll be good. I'll be quiet. Just make them come back. They weren't coming back. They were having dinner. They were watching television. They were sleeping in a warm bed, together, in a house that was no longer filled with shouting, a house made peaceful by my absence. A sob tore from my throat, a harsh, guttural sound I didn't recognize as my own. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a cry of pure, undiluted rage. Rage for the stolen years. Rage for the love I was denied. Rage for the lie I was forced to carry. I rested my forehead against the iron bars, the cold biting into my skin. The truth hadn't set me free. It had just handed me a different kind of prison. The prison of knowing I was never wanted. Not because I was bad, but because I was in the way. I stayed there for a long time, the anger washing through me in waves, scouring the emptiness clean. It was a terrible, painful feeling, but it was better than the hollow void. It was something to hold on to. It was real. Eventually, the shiver started again, this time from the cold. I pushed myself away from the fence, my palms imprinted with the pattern of the bars. I walked back to my car, my steps measured and deliberate. When I got back to my apartment, the orderly quiet felt different. It was no longer a refuge. It was a museum exhibit dedicated to a person who didn't exist. The perfectly aligned books, the spotless kitchen counters, the single, pristine white orchid on the coffee table. It was all part of the costume. I stood in the middle of my living room, the silence pressing in. The central question of my life, what did I do wrong, had been answered. Nothing. I did nothing wrong. The relief was that I was innocent. The horror was that it hadn't mattered. The case against myself was closed. The case for who I was supposed to be now, without the guilt that had defined me, was just beginning. And the file was completely, terrifyingly empty.